Hey, y'all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the stream today. Today, we're going to have Carlo chatting about on outages, stories from a career in operations. And I got to admit, I've seen a precursor to this talk. So I will tell you it's going to be quite good. Let's bring Carlo up here.
Thanks. Yeah, I included a couple more stories to keep it fresh for you. Everyone likes watching a good trade wreck, so I can't wait to share them with everyone in the audience.
Awesome. Yeah, let's get your slides up here. And yeah, let me know if you need anything. Folks in chat, feel free to ask your questions. We'll handle them at the end.
Yeah. So like Danielle said, I'm here to talk about outages and share a couple stories from my career in operations. Like she said, my name's Carlo. I'm a staff engineer at HackerOne. Spent over 10 years working in operations in tech, and I have experience both in public and private cloud. I'll be sharing some stories from both today. So first, in the description, even we talk about a squirrel and a flight and how that might have delayed your flight. So about 10 years ago, I worked in a NOC for the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. It was really reminiscent of that early 2000 era television show where you see that room full of monitors, projections on the walls. Every desk had 6 monitors. We switched between 2 or 3 computers. This is actually a picture of the NOC I worked in. I know a lot of the folks in that photo. The NOC itself was responsible for about 28,000 services in the United States. There are a lot of different types of sites and locations. Some have racks and racks and racks of equipment. Others just had a 2U enclosure that sat a few feet away from the air traffic controller. And when I say service here, usually that can be distilled down to like a network cable that comes from a router or a switch and just pops on over to a server or legacy piece of equipment. The whole operation was 5 nines, right? So that's about 5 minutes of downtime a year. Fortunately, every single service was built with redundancy. And there's a whole team that did the calculation for the uptime and the downtime and what we reported to management and what we reported to the customers. Is a whole operation upon itself. But anyway, overall, the job was a basic NOC gig. Calls came in, you helped them with their issues. This was a network operation center, right? So network issues typically. Sometimes you dispatch a tech to go on site to work on the equipment. A lot of times my issues were pretty trivial. You'd be frankly shocked on the failure rate of the network devices that I've worked with, Cisco and Juniper devices. Occasionally we'd have a really interesting problem, like the impact of heating food in a microwave and how it might make your Wi-Fi go out or your router to stop working. One of my more favorite issues I worked on was from a small air traffic control tower in the Midwest. And when I say small, I mean pretty small, a few flights an hour on a good day. So one day I get a call from the tower operator saying, one of their systems failed over to the backup. So I pulled up the router and I took a look and I saw the link down, did a bit more troubleshooting, and I kind of determined, I saw the line looked like it was a little dirty. So typically like a break in the cable or something to that nature. So I get a tech on site and he lets me know that he replaced the cable and it looks like that somebody may have closed the rack door on the cable a few times and it just eventually broke. Things happen, right? So anyway, he let the tower crew know, don't do that anymore. You don't have to open the enclosure. It's really just for the techs to manage the equipment. A week goes by and I happen to get a call from that same tower again, and the same service went down. So on a whim, I asked the person on the call to check the cable, and they let me know that it's broken. And so send the tech out to replace the cable again. And this time the tech notices that that same cable is broken, but also a lot of the others are beaten up, fraying or kind of crushed in some spots. So he proactively replaces all the cables. And this time the tech locks the enclosure with a combination lock that he happened to have in his kit. So a little bit more time goes by. And don't you know, I get another call from that same tower. And this time it's a little more urgent. Not only did that same service go down, but their backup happened to be down for maintenance at the same time. So I call the tech. He happens to be close by, and we dispatch him immediately. He was pretty surprised to see the rack was still locked with this combination lock. So he opened it up, reached in, and started pulling the cable out. And suddenly he hears a lot of chattering sound and noises from the back of the rack. I wasn't there, obviously. I wasn't right next to him, but I hear his phone drop to the floor, and what I'm pretty sure is him jumping off of his ladder. But he later told me that a squirrel leapt out of the rack and started screaming at him and all the folks in the control tower. So the squirrel starts running around the tower, causing a whole bunch of chaos, and air traffic controllers stop operating their computers and the radars and try and usher the squirrel out of the tower. Meanwhile, the tech pulls the router out and starts looking behind toward the back of the enclosure and sees a hole in the wall where the cables are being fed through, and it looks a little bigger than what it should have been, but not so bad that he would have thought anything from it. After everything was back up and the squirrel was taken care of, the tech started looking around the tower, and on the outside he saw that there's a hole on the outside of the tower on that exterior. And apparently earlier in that year, the airport had done some maintenance, removed some fixtures that were attached to the tower and didn't quite patch everything up fully. And at least one squirrel happened to find its way into the building that way and just crawled through the walls and eventually found the opening where the rack was and decided that was a really great warm spot for the winter. Either through boredom or hunger or something else, it would just chew on the wires. And by sheer chance, it chewed through the same one a couple times. So really, it was quite a weird scenario. I didn't really have a strong takeaway here beyond that. Sometimes operational problems are just weird. Don't get me wrong. I operate a lot with Occam's razor. The obvious answer is typically the right one, but sometimes you end up with a rodent in some equipment, and no one would have ever guessed that coming into that call, right? So. Sometimes you just have to keep your minds open to the possibilities. Realize that I didn't click through and shown my images here. This is what kind of the tower would look like. If you've been to the airport, this is if you've never worked in a server environment. That's like a couple U enclosure. User the measurements, and then this is what I imagine the squirrel look like actually. So. Anyway, moving on. A few years later, I was at the same company, but now I was working for a specific FAA program. This program worked doing pub sub messages for various other programs in the FAA. Used the same private cloud I just talked about, but this time instead of being spread across 4,000 to 5,000 sites in the United States, we worked at just 22 air route traffic control centers. These are spread out geographically. There's 20 in the continental U.S. and then Alaska and Hawaii. So each one of these for the team I was on did some basic message directing. Sometimes they would send messages to towers, sometimes to weather centers, whatever. The equipment was pretty basic. It was HP servers, just a few U at a time. We had 2 sites in particular that had extra equipment since they handled all the coordination for the other sites, authentication, and some other load balancing. One site could probably handle the load for less busy hours, morning in the U.S. East Coast or evening on the West Coast, but they definitely couldn't handle the load from the entire U.S. Throughout the day, and we just didn't have the tech refresh budget to to build out that better capacity at the time. This extra equipment was an older IBM Blade Center, which was a 9U piece of equipment that slots large chips or blades into. It kind of looks a little bit like this. This is a IBM Blade Center H series. It's almost the same one that we use in these sites. They remind me a lot of old school video game consoles, actually. So when you pull out that cartridge, you see it on the left pulling out. We joke that you have to blow into the connector in the air center or the Blade Center before slotting it in, or it wouldn't work. Because of how finicky these were and the lead time to get replacements, we would keep at least one actively configured and available to be swapped out just in case. So you might see where I'm going with this with this preamble. One morning after stand-up, we had a call from the on-site tech at this major site, and it's pretty unusual because normally we call them and we let them know, hey, can you swap out this hard drive or check on this battery backup, whatever. Today, the tech said that while he was walking through the server room, he saw that one of the blades just was lit up with red lights. Every single light on it was red. It's kind of making not as much sound as he would have expected. We let him know that we'd run some diagnostics, but stay close just in case. Turns out we couldn't even do that. We couldn't access the blade remotely. The chassis didn't even see it. So we had the tech console in, and turns out he couldn't even see it locally when he consoled directly into the blade. We did have the tech try to reseat it a few times, blow on the console, so to speak, but didn't really work out. At this point, we had hit higher traffic for these servers. The entire United States started to wake up. We started seeing West Coast traffic. So the redundant Blade Center at the secondary site started to struggle. And so now we have half of our operations team start shedding some lower priority load from the secondary site, while the first half tries to get this original site back up. 2 hours into the mess, we've exhausted all the spares at that main site. None of them are operable. They all don't light up. We start to consider, is it the receptacle in the chassis? But we ruled that out by swapping one of the working blades into it. Like I said, these weren't exactly things like hard drives you could pick up at your Best Buy or Micro Center or wherever. We had to special order them, and we had to configure them specifically for that site and the rest of the chassis configuration. The next closest spare we actually had was in our test lab, just a couple doors down from where we worked, which was several states away. So we had a quick recap meeting, and we actually decided it'd be cheaper for one of us to fly out to that site, traveling with a known working blade in a Pelican case, than it would be to take continued downtime. So it started at 9 a.m. As a reduced capacity incident. Now is a full-blown outage, and it required travel, and all this before noon. I opted to stay back while my colleague flew to the major site. He got there in a couple hours and starts working through the blade replacement. Fortunately, the blade is recognized by the chassis, which is great. Solid. Less luckily, he needed to reconfigure it from scratch. Something didn't quite sit right with the rest of the configuration of the chassis. And unfortunately, these aren't the kinds of things you could configure with normal tools like Ansible or Puppet. At the end of the day, the service was degraded for somewhere around 32 hours. One of our engineers got a free trip to a major city in the United States, and we gained a whole lot of leverage to do a tech refresh to remove these pieces of equipment out of our architecture, mainly due to just supply of parts. But it took a whole lot of time and a whole lot of persistence to get to that point. So moving into the cloud, wanted to talk about the first Amazon startup I worked at. I was faced with a crash course on security at the edge. The startup itself was a combination CMS, CRM, donation platform, blogging platform, a little bit of everything. It was built for advocacy, so everyone could talk to anyone about their passions and advocate for their causes. And I quite literally mean everyone. So it was the lead up to the 2020 election, and we had plenty of political customers, especially in the United States, but also globally, from the UK to Australia and all the way back. So we often had users that targeted people on our platform or candidates or parties even, just because they disagreed with their policies. The app itself was pretty basic. This diagram is basically it, right? It is Ruby on Rails with Postgres database. It had HA proxy in front of it and a WAF, which at the time we used Akamai. We used Datadog and archived S3 after the H out of Datadog. Really, honestly, nothing wild. Very, very basic app. So one day I get a call from the general counsel at the company. I happened to onboard with her a couple years before, and we've chatted here and there from time to time. But this time she tells me she needs my help, and there's urgency and sensitivity to the request. So what I come to find out is one of the larger political customers had been targeted by a distributed denial service, which isn't unusual. As I said, we have folks that disagreed with customers on our platform. So we had a really strong defense against denial services. We use Akamai among various other configurations down the stack at HA proxy or in the Rails app itself. So sometimes we'd get users just, they'd spin up a script and hit us with a few million requests. And most of these would get blocked at the Akamai WAF. A couple slipped through though, and that's what happened in this case. So the request that slipped through for this political customer at the time was things like account signups, fraudulent donations, threats in blog comments, a little bit of everything. The organization took the threats quite seriously, and they wanted to press charges, and they asked for our cooperation with law enforcement. So we kicked off a giant scramble. This was one of the bigger customers on the platform at the time, so we jumped to it as fast as possible. We fetched logs for hundreds of IP addresses. This truly was distributed. We saw a pretty wide range that got through the Akamai WAF. We started getting our story together on what was our original response to the denial service, what were the requests that got through, why did they get through, what did they touch, what was our architecture like. Basically everything you could want to know, but then more because we were talking to folks that didn't have the technical background that we did. Not only that, we had to reach out to Akamai and Amazon to have them pull their logs for their same corroborating evidence. And this was a really tight time. The law enforcement folks needed the information as fast as possible. So we worked in a couple shifts. Fortunately, we had a pretty global team, but we worked for 36 hours straight, gathering all this information. We delivered it, and I don't actually know what came from it. I don't know if they found the person that did it. My suspicion is probably not, based on the logs that Akamai sent over. The actor definitely used a wide variety of tactics to obscure their presence. But that said, the whole event was really great. It was a really great experience for me. It showed me that not every incident was technical in nature. And since that event, I've been pulled into a couple different other legal incidents, as I like to call them. And it really kind of shows that you need to move quickly and accurately. There's typically a much stricter deadline. You're not trying to get the system back online. You're trying to show intent and show actions that people took. I also realized, we couldn't withhold information, or we had to be 100% sure on what we were gathering. If we happen to miss some information on our architecture or didn't send the right zip file with the logs, it would have been problematic for us, both in terms of legal, right? We could be held legally responsible, but then also reputational damages. If we couldn't deliver properly, this customer was not likely to re-sign with us. So that was one of my few instances I had some time spending with a legal incident. The one where monitoring and backups failed. So we always hear about these stories. I'm gonna share one with you nowadays when backups were not working. At another startup, we also used Ruby on Rails there, and we leveraged a tool called Sentry. If you don't know what Sentry is, it's an application monitoring tool and an error tracking tool, among other things. There's a SaaS option. For compliance reasons, we did not use the SaaS option. We self-hosted. For the best experience in Sentry, you install a library with your code, so you can send errors directly from your code into Sentry. With Ruby, you install the Sentry gem. About 3 years ago, Sentry deprecated the gem, Sentry Raven, and published an updated one called Sentry Ruby. The startup I was at did not update from the deprecated gem, though it still worked. It wasn't causing any problems. We just weren't getting new features, and we had no support if something did go wrong with that gem. Overall, the migration was quite easy. The Sentry team wrote a great documentation, talking through what changed, what's no longer available, what is available. They advised sort of features that are new that you should enable, like profiling and better trace gathering options. The team I was on had a lot of discussion around the merge request. It changed over 200 files in our code base, and all of which were typically centering around error handling, which made it all the more sensitive. Over the years, the team added custom logic. We call them monkey patches in Ruby. Sometimes we changed how the middleware worked. Other times we changed filtering. All these things had to be adjusted and rewritten or removed if it was no longer needed or fully compatible. I hesitated a lot on merging this. I just felt like something was going to go wrong, but we couldn't see anything locally. Everything worked fine, so I deployed it and did some testing in not production. We don't test in production. We'll get there actually, so I promoted to prod. Everything seemed fine, and it was fine, honestly, for about 20 minutes. And then we saw platform degradation. The Sentry application failed fully, but then our core platform was degraded. We were seeing server errors, both from Amazon status checks, EC2 status checks coming back in, as well as just Datadog blowing up with various error logs. My colleague took a look at the platform issues. He found CPU was extremely high on the application servers, and it looked like it was just trying to chew through really complex work. Which, if you know Ruby on Rails, you can have some complex work, but typically speaking, you're not doing major computation in Ruby. You'll do that somewhere else. So we came to the conclusion that the profiling that we enabled with the Sentry update, even though it was advertised as extremely low latency and safe for production all of the time, we figured that was probably the problem. So he wrote out a quick deploy and removed that capability, that feature. And even though we still saw higher than average CPU and memory utilization, it was acceptable again. Still not quite where we wanted, I guess. Anyway, while that was going on, I was looking at Sentry, and at first it only reported high memory usage, which made sense. I figured new library, more rich data, it makes sense. However, we would see the server exhaust 64 gigabytes of memory in an hour. Even after removing profiling, we'd still see it run out of memory. We slowly peeled back the new features while keeping the upgraded gem in a couple different deployments. And even when we were at parity with what was there before and what was in the new current release, we still were seeing high memory usage. And eventually our autoscaling group cycled the instance out due to it being unhealthy. And that, frankly, that shouldn't have been a problem, except it was. Real quick, our Sentry configuration uses an external Postgres instance for configuration data, things like users, notification settings, integrations. Event data itself is actually stored in ClickHouse, which ClickHouse was deployed as part of our normal operation of deployment for Sentry, which was Docker Compose. So we had a ClickHouse container where all the events were being stored on disk. We did have a backup cron. It ran every 3 hours, backing up critical volumes, specifically Redis and ClickHouse. We stored those in S3, compressed. However, I went to the backup and found that the most recent one had been from months ago, and it was not even compatible with the version we were on anymore with Sentry. So instead of taking my version of Sentry, downgrading the database with it, then restoring the data, and then re-upgrading it, which I felt was extremely likely to corrupt our database, I chose the other option, which meant we lost billions of events from last year. The impact was something. The engineering team uses Sentry, both the historic data, but also the tracking and the trace data in Sentry for a lot of troubleshooting. So at the end of the day, it was a really hard Slack message to write to the engineering team, detailing all of this and letting them know that we really were starting pretty much from scratch with Sentry. The only real silver lining was that we didn't have to reconfigure the teams and alerts anymore. They were there from Postgres. So everyone has a story where backups failed, and that's at least my most recent one. Finally, talked about testing prod. Never test in prod, and here's a story about doing some stuff in production. So I mentioned I work at HackerOne as a staff engineer. The product team recently released a really cool feature. It's called automations. The TLDR of it is it gives you a Node.js sandbox to automate boring tasks in. So you could say, when your organization receives a report against a certain asset, you can route it to certain places in the platform based on your own logic. I kind of say we deployed this. I did support from the infrastructure side, provided some consultation, but I didn't do any of the programming for this. It's a really great release from the product team, but I didn't actually have much to do with the release itself. But anyway, the product team and the infrastructure team spent quite a bit of time discussing the best way to approach this. We wanted to give people a sandbox to write in Node, and we came up with a few guardrails for it. For example, your automation can't hit the public internet. We didn't want people being able to use the platform to denial service people or do anything else malicious. Or automations, each automation is a distinct instance upon itself and doesn't share any part of the sandbox with another automation. So all the people listening are probably pretty savvy serverless folks. So you probably already know where I'm going with what we used. We used Lambda functions, actually. We did our due diligence. We deployed the architecture in a separate account, used really tightly bound security groups, and reviewed the whole system several times in many different configurations. The nice thing about HackerOne is that we welcome people to hack on our platform. So on day one of the feature getting released, we saw several reports from researchers detailing vulnerabilities. One of them were escalated to the infrastructure team, to my team, showing a proof of concept about how you could exfiltrate user credentials from this automation, Amazon credentials, that is. They showed that it was printable from the environment variable file in the Firecracker VM. It's really actually kind of interesting to see the train of thought that they use. Most researches include, how did they come across this and how did they proof of concept it and everything. And the research in this case was no exception. They kind of just started iterating over, basic node libraries that they could import. And then once they found, they could import ones that interacted with the file system, they just started iterating over what files they could read. The first one they actually tried and succeeded to read was etc password. And then they continued on until they found the environment variables and found the credentials in there. Fortunately, the researcher was a responsible person and reported it immediately. We started looking at it as soon as possible as well, and started digging in and found that we actually did a pretty good job following the principle least privileged for the execution rule. It didn't really stop us from thoroughly investigating absolutely every single log we could get our hands on. Application logs, Lambda logs, CloudTrail logs, you name it, we looked at it. And luckily, we didn't find anything suspicious. So no major security incident, no bounty payoff, but it did send us scrambling for quite a number of hours. And while we, the funny thing here is, like I said, we spent a lot of time talking and architecting this. We even pulled in a really senior group of Amazon folks, some principal engineers from AWS themselves. And no one really thought about like, hey, would this be a flaw or could this be taken advantage of, or is this something we should watch out for? So even through all of that testing and discussion and architecting, we didn't find this bug, and could have been, frankly, devastating if it was exploited and we didn't take the proper precautions. Just through to best practice is least privileged. So the short and long of this is you really can't find all the bugs or vulnerabilities or quirks. Sometimes you need to be ready to ship and be ready to react really, really quickly if you need to. Briefly touching on that was my story. Hope you enjoyed them. But touching on some minor things from each of them. Like we learned with the squirrel, some issues are just weird. They're not always really straightforward, broken wires. Sometimes, as we saw with the Blade Center and a couple of the other instance, sometimes you just need persistence and maybe sometimes travel if you can get by with that. We saw with our legal incident that not all incidents are technical, right? We have to be prepared to communicate with non-technical folks and be ready to explain things in layman's terms. As we saw with Sentry, we need to diversify your failure testing. I'm very proud that HackerOne does annual or more disaster recovery testing, simulating like a full region failure. But as we can see, you still need to test other things, right? Like what happens if your backup fails? What happens if certain aspects of a region fails? And finally, if you'll build it, they'll come, right, and they'll find vulnerabilities in it. So you need to be prepared to respond quickly and concisely to these vulnerabilities. Like I said, that was my last story. Happy to answer any questions, or if you want to contact me directly, LinkedIn, email, whatever is the next best thing. Yeah.
Cool. I'll pop up here. Yeah, thanks for sharing all those stories.
Yeah, plenty of them to have.
Yeah, we had a comment from Daryl. Yeah, this echoes my sentiments as well. It's definitely great to hear with all the scale for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely it's really wild to see how that first company I worked for, the one with the squirrel and the Blade Center that failed. That was a Fortune 500 company, and we still ran into things like just absolutely insane, that like the squirrel, or we couldn't get budget for a refresh of equipment that was end of life, right? And we ran into having to fly someone several states away to fix it with quite an expensive check bag. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure that not all your problems will be technical. I've run into I can't think of like any specific, but there are definitely like outages that happened because, people didn't communicate and
Yeah, those are some of the hardest ones too, because as far as nothing changes, right? Like you're operating like normal day to day things, and then something breaks, right, or something like, and then you're thrown right into investigation mode, and trying to figure out what's going on. And if you have that open communication with your teams, it's so much easier to figure it out. Um, so.
yeah, for sure. Awesome. Does anyone in chat have any questions or comments? Sometimes there's like a 10-second lag here for us. So I'll just ask and then let it sit. Yeah, this is very on theme too. So our Halloween scary production stories. So
yeah, there's always everyone has at least one. Like I'm sure you have a couple too. Like it's, but the nice thing is, like, when you all experience these 5 from me without having to live through the terror of, oh no, we accidentally sent out Amazon keys to how many people that like could be doing bad things with them. Like that, things like that are, I want to say they keep me up at night, but they're definitely scary. Like you never know.
yeah, I think the big thing, at least with the stuff that I've caused, like, is as scary as it is, like, fess up to it, say what you did.
Yeah.
And then it can just give people a much better view on what's going on, rather than, they're trying to figure out what's going on, and then at the end it points to you. It's better that you just own up to it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's such a good example to set too. Like, no matter how senior or junior you are, the more people that own up to these things and like own them, the better. Like, just such a better open communication to have across the board. And that's how we learn, right? Like, I mean, if I hid, my upgrade for that gem for Sentry, we were all pretty sure that's what it was. But like, if I could have found a way to hide it, like, who was I wasn't benefiting anyone, right? Really. Like, even if I just rolled it back myself and fixed it, like, that's not actually teaching anyone or growing at all.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Yeah, it looks like we don't have any questions, so I guess you're off the hook. Carlo is in our Discord, so if you do have questions or just want to chat with him, should be available in there.
Yep. Always happy to share scary stories of what could go wrong. So.
Oh yeah, and also if you aren't in our Discord, it's believinserverless.com/community. That should get you a Discord link. If not, feel free to DM me. I can get you access as well. We've got people that have, many years of experience, and people that are just kind of wanting to learn about this new serverless thing. So definitely open to all levels, and everyone has something to share. That's what I really like about the conversations we have.
Yeah, there's such a great variety of content from the group. It's really nice.
But awesome. Yeah. So I think we're probably good to end the stream here. Thank you so much for joining us, Carlo.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. I look forward to the next one, and either chatting or listening. It'll be great.
Yeah. We'll definitely keep doing them. So awesome. Well, see you later, chat. I'm gonna end this.